what is the meaning of life to plague humanity ever since we became sentient. We've never been able to objectively answer this question as a species. However, a lot of us have found comfort in many different ideologies to at least subdue the anxiety that it causes. In many different religions, a deity made the entire universe, put us all in it, and whatever we do on this earth will be used to determine when and how we spend eternity afterwards. For some others, the meaning of life is the love we share with friends, family, and our loved ones. Some others believe the existence of life in itself is what makes it worth living. But for nihilists, life is meaningless. All action, suffering, emotions, both good and bad, are entirely senseless and meaningless. This is nihilism, the belief in nothing. At some point in our lives, many of us have been faced with nihilistic thoughts. We're hit by a strong sense of purposelessness, like our lives have no meaning, and we have no intrinsic value. Usually, this happens when we begin to question our old beliefs, but also just before we get new ones to hold on to. It's in that phase where you're growing out of your parents' beliefs, learning new things, getting new experiences, and forming your own views about the world. And usually, all of these thoughts begin with one simple question. Why? A three-lettered monosyllabic word that's capable of making anything and everything that feels like the rock of your foundation start to become slippery. Like quicksand dragging you into the misery that maybe, just maybe, your whole life hasn't been what you thought it was. Just pause and take a moment to think about your core values and just ask the question, why? Why do you believe those things? Where did they come from? Who did they come from? Keep asking and eventually you'll arrive at a point where there's no longer an answer. You'll arrive at nothing. All the religions of the world, all of our scientific discovery, but yet the question why is one that we still cannot answer. And so for the nihilist, it is at this point that they come to the conclusion that there is no why. There is no answer, there's simply nothing. As Alan Watts once wrote, life is nothing more than a trip from the maternity ward to the crematorium. It's really in the name. The term nihilism comes from the Latin word nihil, which translates to nothing, and ism, which translates to ideology. It's the ideology of nothing. But that doesn't really help us in understanding it completely. Usually, people confuse nihilism for pessimism, but they are very different from each other. Pessimists believe in the worst outcome. They have a downtrending view of the world, and tend to focus on the negatives in life, because they believe that, in the end, evil will always overcome good, and this is what makes them different. Pessimists believe that there's good in the world, but they just don't think humans are capable of doing it, at least in its entirety. Nihilists, on the other hand, do not believe in anything. They don't believe that there's evil in the world, neither do they believe that there's good in the world. In the mind of the nihilist, the world simply exists, and humans created morality, thereby creating good and evil. Let's take the glass cup metaphor for instance. Optimists say you should see the glass as half full, while pessimists say we should see the glass as half empty. Nihilists? They say throw the entire cup away, because what does it matter if it's full or empty? Full, empty, good, bad, it's all irrelevant. We're all going to die anyway. Nihilism is also often compared to several other philosophies, like cynicism and apathy. But again, they are all very different from one another, and correctly categorizing your thoughts in these baskets may be harder than you think. Cynics believe that people are always motivated by self-interest. They don't believe that anyone can have intrinsically good motives. They have no faith in the human species and believe that we're all entirely selfish, only fighting for our own benefit. However, the idea that humans are not good means that in the mind of the cynic, good exists out there somewhere, just not in humans. In the mind of the nihilist, nothing exists out there. There's no good or evil. They don't see people as evil, neither do they see them as good, because they don't believe either of those things exist. They're simply traits we've applied to things. Apathetic people just don't care. They believe that there's meaning to life, but they simply don't care about it. Nihilism, on the other hand, is the idea that there's no grand design or purpose, nothing to believe in, and therefore no meaning. This brings to mind the paradox of nihilism. If you believe in nothing, then that nothing becomes something that you believe in. But since you now believe in something, then there is no nihilism, because nihilism is the belief that there is nothing.
Let's bounce.
Nihilism is quite different from other philosophical ideas because it was first a literary invention before it ever became philosophical. As a result, it's not clearly defined as many of the other philosophies that exist. Many different people explained it in many different ways, but eventually these different definitions got categorized, forming many different kinds of nihilism. There's political nihilism. Political nihilists believe that for humanity to move forward as a species, all political, social, and religious order must be destroyed. Then there's ethical nihilism. It rejects the idea of absolute ethical or moral values. With this type of nihilism, good or bad is only defined by society, and, as such, it shouldn't be followed if we as a species will ever attain absolute individual freedom. We can kind of just do whatever we want. And then we have existential nihilism. It's the understanding that life has no value or meaning. It's the most popular kind of nihilism, and the one we've been talking about for most of this video. For nihilists, the existence of things like the state, religious bodies, and even communal morality is a breach on our freedom as individuals. If we can't do absolutely anything we want to do, then are we truly free? Or have we simply bound ourselves by some kind of invisible mental chain for reasons we can't explain? One night I was scrolling through Reddit and I came across the question, if you had the chance to save your pet or a stranger, who would you save? An overwhelming number of people said their pet, pretty obviously. When one commenter was confronted, they simply asked the question, why do you think a human life is worth more than that of an animal? And no one really had an answer. Of course people tried to beat around the bush, but the question why was never answered. And that right there is the point of the nihilist. If we can't answer why we bind ourselves by these rules, then why do we choose to do it? Well, it might be because of the existential horror and the emotional anguish that comes with agreeing to the fact that life is meaningless. Think about it for a minute. If life is truly meaningless and everything we're doing has no value, then all the feats of science, the wonders of technology, things like space exploration and human rights movements, look at how far we've come. And then think about the fact that it all might just be a waste, a blip in time with no consequence whatsoever in the grand scheme of things. Knowing that all the things we experience, the ups and downs we go through, that in the end, it's all for nothing. We aren't obligated to understand the chaos of reality, just to laugh at it. Friedrich Nietzsche was a strange philosopher because he argued both for and against nihilism at the same time. Arguing for, he explained that there is no objective structure or order in our world except for the one that we create for ourselves. He once said, every belief, every considering something true is necessarily false, because there is simply no true world. He believed nihilism would expose all of humanity's beliefs and truths as nothing but a symptom of defective Western mythology. As he famously said, God is dead. Now he wasn't talking about the actual deity of the religions, he was talking metaphorically about the power that religious orders held at the time, and how people were starting to chart their own paths, find their own meaning in life, denying what the status quo was at the time. But then, in the same breath, Friedrich argued against nihilism, saying that in the coming centuries, the advent of nihilism would drive civilization towards a catastrophe, a disaster waiting to implode, a river that has reached its end. And if you look at the most destructive civilizations in human history, we can clearly see that this is true. Long-standing cultural traditions, beliefs, religious institutions, and even financial systems are broken down, and nothingness starts to creep in. Think about it. If nothing matters and we're all just a random combination of transient atoms, how can we call Hitler objectively one of the worst humans to ever live for trying to wipe out an entire culture? At a fundamental level, most of us understand that all of these things are indeed terrible. But the danger is that because we cannot explain why we feel that way logically, we can never convince another person to follow the same path. And that is exactly what Friedrich feared. Some people still blame him for the Nazi era, because although he saw all of these dangers, he still continued preaching nihilism. He believed that if we could work through the breakdown of civilization that nihilism would eventually cause, we can then create a new course of action for mankind. He believed that to move forward as a species, we must create a new morality, one that does away with the prejudice of what existed before, because at the end of the day, tearing down your old house shouldn't make you homeless. Rather, it should present you with an opportunity to build a bigger and better home. Pause and look around you for a moment. Observe everything that's going on, particularly on social media. You can see that we as a species might just be heading for another nihilism outbreak. Religion no longer holds any say in what is morally acceptable. People are destroying long-standing beliefs and cultural practices, and are instead charting new courses for themselves. Anything, no matter how despicable you think it is, now has a loyal fan base defending why they have a right to do whatever it is they want to do. And in reality, why not? That's the question no one can answer. Humanity will keep shifting the needle forward ever so slightly, until one day, none of us will be able to tell the other that they're wrong, because why are they wrong? William Shakespeare once wrote, "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing." If life is truly meaningless and we have no purpose for being here, our response should be to make the best out of a bad situation. Instead of seeing the glass half full or half empty, we can simply throw it out and drink directly from the faucet until we're satisfied. Because at the end of the day, life alone is reason enough for living. We get one life to do whatever we want, at least in this reality. It's important to stay up to date with things. We want to live life on our own terms, so it's important to align our views accordingly. Now, most of us don't want to sit around watching news every day. It takes up a lot of time, and honestly, it can be depressing sometimes. With Morning Brew, you can stay up to date with business news in just 5 minutes a day. I've talked about Morning Brew before, and I still use it to this day. I try to make the most of my days, and with Morning Brew, I can stay up to date with the world before I even get out of bed. If you're not into reading news article after news article or watching it on TV, Morning Brew is perfect for you. It's concise, efficient, and can really give you a new perspective on things. If you like to keep up on everything tech, business, or finance, I suggest you check it out. If you're interested, click the link in the description and get started with Morning Brew today. It's free and takes less than 15 seconds to do. You'll be staying up to date with reality and supporting my channel at the same time.
Human existence is scary and confusing. A few 100,000 years ago, we became conscious and found ourselves in a strange place. It was filled with other beings. We could eat some could eat us. There was liquid stuff we could drink, things we could use to make more things. The daytime sky had a tiny yellow ball that warmed our skin. The night sky was filled with beautiful lights. This place was obviously made for us. Something was watching over us. We were home. This made everything much less scary and confusing. But the older we got, the more we learned about the world and ourselves. We learned that the twinkling lights are not shining beautifully for us, they just are. We learned that we're not at the center of what we now call the universe, and that it is much, much older than we thought. We learned that we're made of many little dead things, which make up bigger things that are not dead for some reason. And that we're just another temporary stage in a history going back over 1 billion years. We learned, in awe, that we live on a moist speck of dust moving around a medium-sized star in a quiet region of one arm of an average galaxy, which is part of a galaxy group that we will never leave. And this group is only one of thousands that together make up a galaxy supercluster. But even our supercluster is only one in thousands that make up what we call the observable universe. The universe might be 1 million times bigger, but we will never know. We could throw words around like 200 billion galaxies or trillions of stars or bazillions of planets, but all of these numbers mean nothing. Our brains can't comprehend these concepts. The universe is too big. There is too much of it. But size is not the most troubling concept we have to deal with. It's time, or more precisely, the time we have. If you're lucky enough to live to 100, you have 5,200 weeks at your disposal. If you're 25 now, then you have 3,900 weeks left. If you're going to die at 70, then there are 2,340 weeks left. A lot of time, but also not really. And then what? Your biological processes will break down, and the dynamic pattern that is you will stop being dynamic. It will dissolve until there is no you left. Some believe that there is a part of us we can't see or measure, but we have no way to find out. So this life might be it, and we might end up dead forever. This is less scary than it sounds, though. If you don't remember the 13.75 billion years that went by before you existed, then the trillions and trillions and trillions of years that come after will pass in no time once you're gone. Close your eyes. Count to 1. That's how long forever feels. And as far as we know, in the end, the universe itself will die and nothing will ever change again. Our videos induce existential dread in many people, and the last few minutes probably haven't helped. So for once we want to offer a different way of looking at these things. An unscientific, subjective point of view. The philosophy of Kurzgesagt, if you want. Please take it with a grain of salt. We don't know any more about human existence than you do. We counter existential dread with optimistic nihilism. What do we mean by that? Well, to summarize, it seems very unlikely that 200 trillion stars have been made for us. In a way, it feels like the cruelest joke in existence has been played on us. We became self-aware, only to realize this story is not about us. While it is great to know about electrons and the powerhouse of the cell, science doesn't do a lot to make this less depressing. Okay, but so what? You only get one shot at life, which is scary, but it also sets you free. If the universe ends in heat death, every humiliation you suffer in your life will be forgotten. Every mistake you made will not matter in the end. Every bad thing you did will be voided. If our life is all we get to experience, then it's the only thing that matters. If the universe has no principles, the only principles relevant are the ones we decide on. If the universe has no purpose, then we get to dictate what its purpose is. Humans will most certainly cease to exist at some point. But before we do, we get to explore ourselves and the world around us. We get to experience feelings. We get to experience food, books, sunrises, and being with each other. The fact that we're even able to think about these things is already kind of incredible. It's easy to think of ourselves as separated from everything, but this is not true. We are as much the universe as a neutron star, or a black hole, or a nebula. Even better actually, we are its thinking and feeling part, the sensory organs of the universe. We are truly free in a universe-sized playground. So we might as well aim to be happy and to build some kind of utopia in the stars. It's not as if we found out everything there is to know. We don't know why the rules of the universe are as they are, how life came into existence, what life is. We have no idea what consciousness is, or if we are alone in the universe. But we can try to find some answers. There are billions of stars to visit, diseases to cure, people to help, happy feelings to be experienced, and video games to finish. There is so much to do. So wrapping up, you've probably used up a good chunk of the time available to you. If this is our one shot at life, there is no reason not to have fun and live as happily as possible. Bonus points if you make the life of other people better. More bonus points if you help build a galactic human empire. Do the things that make you feel good. You get to decide whatever this means for you. Everybody feels lonely from time to time. When we have no one to sit next to at lunch, when we move to a new city, or when nobody has time for us at the weekend. But over the last few decades, this occasional feeling has become chronic for millions. In the UK, 60% of 18 to 34-year-olds say they often feel lonely. In the US, 46% of the entire population feel lonely regularly. We are living in the most connected time in human history, and yet an unprecedented number of us feel isolated. Being lonely and being alone are not the same thing. You can be filled with bliss by yourself and hate every second surrounded by friends. Loneliness is a purely subjective, individual experience. If you feel lonely, you are lonely. A common stereotype is that loneliness only happens to people who don't know how to talk to people or how to behave around others. But population-based studies have shown that social skills make practically no difference for adults when it comes to social connections. Loneliness can affect everybody. Money, fame, power, beauty, social skills, a great personality. Nothing can protect you against loneliness because it's part of your biology. Loneliness is a bodily function, like hunger. Hunger makes you pay attention to your physical needs. Loneliness makes you pay attention to your social needs. Your body cares about your social needs because millions of years ago it was a great indicator of how likely you were to survive. Natural selection rewarded our ancestors for collaboration and for forming connections with each other. Our brains grew and became more and more fine-tuned to recognize what others thought and felt and to form and sustain social bonds. Being social became part of our biology. You were born into groups of 50 to 150 people, which you usually stayed with for the rest of your life. Getting enough calories, staying safe and warm, or caring for offspring was practically impossible alone. Being together meant survival. Being alone meant death. So it was crucial that you got along with others. For your ancestors, the most dangerous threat to survival was not being eaten by a lion, but not getting the social vibe of your group and being excluded. To avoid that, your body came up with social pain. Pain of this kind is an evolutionary adaptation to rejection. A sort of early warning system to make sure you stop behavior that would isolate you. Your ancestors who experienced rejection as more painful were more likely to change their behavior when they got rejected and thus stayed in the tribe, while those who did not got kicked out and most likely died. That's why rejections hurt, and even more so, why loneliness is so painful. These mechanisms for keeping us connected worked great for most of our history until humans began building a new world for themselves. The loneliness epidemic we see today really only started in the late Renaissance. Western culture began to focus on the individual. Intellectuals moved away from the collectivism of the Middle Ages, while the young Protestant theology stressed individual responsibility. This trend accelerated during the Industrial Revolution. People left their villages and fields to enter factories. Communities that had existed for hundreds of years began to dissolve, while cities grew. As our world rapidly became modern, this trend sped up more and more. Today, we move vast distances for new jobs, love and education, and leave our social net behind. We meet fewer people in person, and we meet them less often than in the past. In the US, the mean number of close friends dropped from 3 in 1985 to 2 in 2011. Most people stumble into chronic loneliness by accident. You reach adulthood and become busy with work, university, romance, kids, and Netflix. There's just not enough time. The most convenient and easy thing to sacrifice is time with friends. Until you wake up one day and realize that you feel isolated. That you yearn for close relationships. But it's hard to find close connections as adults, and so loneliness can become chronic. While humans feel pretty great about things like iPhones and spaceships, our bodies and minds are fundamentally the same they were 50,000 years ago. We are still biologically fine-tuned to being with each other. Large-scale studies have shown that the stress that comes from chronic loneliness is among the most unhealthy things we can experience as humans. It makes you age quicker, it makes cancer deadlier, Alzheimer's advance faster, your immune system's weaker. Loneliness is twice as deadly as obesity and as deadly as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. The most dangerous thing about it is that once it becomes chronic, it can become self-sustaining. Physical and social pain use common mechanisms in your brain. Both feel like a threat, and so social pain leads to immediate and defensive behavior when it's inflicted on you. When loneliness becomes chronic, your brain goes into self-preservation mode. It starts to see danger and hostility everywhere. But that's not all. Some studies found that when you're lonely, your brain is much more receptive and alert to social signals, while at the same time, it gets worse at interpreting them correctly. You pay more attention to others, but you understand them less. The part of your brain that recognizes faces gets out of tune and becomes more likely to categorize neutral faces as hostile, which makes it distrustful of others. Loneliness makes you assume the worst about others' intentions towards you. Because of this perceived hostile world, you can become more self-centered to protect yourself, which can make you appear more cold, unfriendly, and socially awkward than you really are.
The storm approaches.
If loneliness has become a strong presence in your life, the first thing you can do is to try to recognize the vicious cycle you may be trapped in. It usually goes something like this. An initial feeling of isolation leads to feelings of tension and sadness, which makes you focus your attention selectively on negative interactions with others. This makes your thoughts about yourself and others more negative, which then changes your behavior. You begin to avoid social interaction, which leads to more feelings of isolation. This cycle becomes more severe and harder to escape each time. Loneliness makes you sit far away from others in class, not answer the phone when friends call, decline invitations until the invitations stop. Each and every one of us has a story about ourselves, and if your story becomes that people exclude you, others pick up on that. And so the outside world can become the way you feel about it. This is often a slow creeping process that takes years and can end in depression and a mental state that prevents connections even if you yearn for them. The first thing you can do to escape it is to accept that loneliness is a totally normal feeling and nothing to be ashamed of. Literally everybody feels lonely at some point in their life. It's a universal human experience. You can't eliminate or ignore a feeling until it goes away magically, but you can accept that you feel it and get rid of its cause. You can self-examine what you focus your attention on and check if you are selectively concentrating on negative things. Was this interaction with a colleague really negative? Or was it really neutral or even positive? What was the actual content of an interaction? What did the other person say? And did they say something bad, or did you add extra meaning to their words? Maybe another person was not really reacting negatively, but just short on time. Then there are your thoughts about the world. Are you assuming the worst about others' intentions? Do you enter a social situation and have already decided how it will go? Do you assume others don't want you around? Are you trying to avoid being hurt and not risking opening up? And if so, can you try to give others the benefit of the doubt? Can you just assume that they're not against you? Can you risk being open and vulnerable again? And lastly, your behavior. Are you avoiding opportunities to be around others? Are you looking for excuses to decline invitations? Or are you pushing others away preemptively to protect yourself? Are you acting as if you're getting attacked? Are you really looking for new connections, or have you become complacent with your situation? Of course, every person and situation is unique and different, and just introspection alone might not be enough. If you feel unable to solve your situation by yourself, please try to reach out and get professional help. It's not a sign of weakness, but of courage. However we look at loneliness as a purely individual problem that needs solving to create more personal happiness, or as a public health crisis, it is something that deserves more attention. Humans have built a world that's nothing short of amazing, and yet none of the shiny things we've made is able to satisfy or substitute our fundamental biological need for connection. Most animals get what they need from their physical surroundings. We get what we need from each other. And we need to build our artificial human world based on that. Let's try something together. Let's reach out to someone today. Regardless if you feel a little bit lonely or if you want to make someone else's day better. Maybe write a friend you haven't spoken to in a while. Call a family member who's become estranged. Invite a work buddy for a coffee. or just go to something you're usually too afraid to go to or too lazy to go to, like a D&D event or a sports club. Everybody's different, so you know what's a good fit for you. Maybe nothing will come of it, and that's okay. Don't do this with any expectations. The goal is just to open up a bit, to exercise your connection muscles so they can grow stronger over time, or to help others exercise them. We want to recommend two of the books we read while researching this video. Emotional First Aid by Guy Winch, a book that addresses, among other topics, how to deal with loneliness in a way that we found helpful and actionable. And Loneliness, Human Nature and the Need for Social Connection by John Cacioppo and William Patrick. It's an entertaining and scientific exploration as to why we experience loneliness on a biological level, how it's spread in society, and what science has to say about how to escape it. Links for both books in the video description.
By your command.
Well, time to make Mundo's rounds.
The largest things in the universe are black holes. In contrast to things like planets or stars, they have no physical size limit and can literally grow endlessly. Although in reality, specific things need to happen to create different kinds of black holes, from really tiny ones to the largest single things in the universe. So how do black holes grow? And how large is the largest of them all? This video will not discuss how black holes work or how they form, since we've looked at that in detail in our black hole and neutron star series. You can check them out afterwards. For now, we're interested in finding the largest thing in the universe. Let's start really small. Primordial black holes. The smallest kind of black holes may or may not exist. If they do, they're probably the oldest objects in the universe, older even than atoms. They would have formed just after the Big Bang, when the universe was so dense with violent energy that any tiny pocket that was just slightly more dense than its neighbors could produce a black hole. The smallest primordial black hole that could still be around would be 8 trillion kilograms or so, the mass of a big mountain. And yet they would be no bigger than a proton. A primordial black hole with the mass of Earth would barely be larger than a coin. This makes them very hard to find, so we haven't actually observed any yet. If they exist, they may even be the mysterious dark matter that holds galaxies together. Let's move on to the kinds of black holes that we know for sure are out there. Stellar black holes.